This actually is kind of scary. Hey everyone, I'm Abbey Sharp. Welcome to Abby's Kitchen. Today's video is sponsored by BetterHelp, and we are back with another toxic episode looking at the oh so controversial ingredients in your food. But first, let me tell you about my sponsor, BetterHelp. So as you guys know, I've struggled with anxiety my whole life, and we know how important mental health is for healing our relationship with food and body. So in 2022, I'm really committing to my mental health, and working with a registered therapist is key to supporting my goals. So I recently discovered BetterHelp, which is the world's largest online therapist network with over 20,000 licensed professional therapists. It's not a crisis line or a self-help line. It's professional therapy done securely anywhere, anytime online. Now, the way it works is that you just log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist, and you can get a timely response without needing to wait weeks between appointments. And I know how important this is because obviously we can't always plan out our anxious episodes, so I know how nice it is to get help when you really need it. It's also a lot more affordable than traditional in-person therapy, and there's also financial aid available for those in need. So if you're struggling with your mental health, check out betterhelp.com/abbysharp to get 10% off of your first month of therapy. That's BetterHelp, and you can join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. All right, let's get back to those scary ingredients. Also, a quick disclaimer that you can see on screen or in the description, and reminder that if you are new here, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and follow me over on TikTok and Instagram for more great myth-busting content. All right, so if you missed my previous episode of this series, you can check that out right here. But to refresh, I'm gonna be looking at another round of scary food additives and ingredients that so many wellness experts insist you avoid. And while I totally understand that nutrition information is overwhelming and that reading food labels can be definitely quite scary and intimidating, here at Abby's Kitchen, we are all about food facts, not fear. So let's kick things off with nitrates. Now, you may know nitrates as the big bad curing agent that gets added to processed foods like bacon, lunch meat, salami, and hot dogs. And they're used largely to help prolong shelf life, enhance color and flavor, and to prevent bacterial growth. Now, rightfully so, there is some concern with overconsumption of nitrates from ultra-processed meats, as research has linked excessive intake to increased cancer risk. But like most things in nutrition science, it's not so cut and dry. So some research has found no association, and other studies suggest that it might just be associated with some cancers, but not others. Ultimately though, nobody wants cancer, so I fully understand the fear that you may feel when an influencer tells you that eating something is going to harm you, or of course, harm your kids. But as we always say here, the dose makes the poison. So it's not as if you have a rash or a bacon and the next day you're gonna fall ill. In fact, based on the best evidence we have to date, the World Health Organization has set the acceptable daily intake for nitrates at 3.7 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day, which translates to around 222 milligrams of nitrates for a 130-pound adult. So, to give you an idea, one slice of bacon roughly contains 0.034 milligrams of nitrates, and one slice of deli meat contains 0.125 milligrams. So this sounds relatively insignificant, right? Now, it's important to note that the limit set by the WHO also factors in dietary nitrates we get from vegetables or even our water supply, which makes up for around 80% of our dietary nitrate intake. I'll speak to why you don't need to be concerned about nitrates in veggies in just a hot minute, but hopefully that illustrates how insignificant an occasional smoked meat sandwich in your diet likely is.
Sometimes twice a day.
Regardless, of course, in response to public concern over nitrates causing cancer, food manufacturers have found ways to market their ultra-processed meats as nitrate-free. So instead of using synthetic nitrates, they can use naturally occurring nitrates from vegetable sources like refined celery powder. And while there is no research to date comparing the effects of natural versus synthetic nitrates in the body, most experts suspect that the health risks in a processed food like a hot dog would be virtually the same because the body sees naturally sourced and synthetically sourced nitrates exactly the same. As for naturally occurring nitrates in whole vegetables, now it's believed that the phytonutrient compounds in vegetables like antioxidants would likely buffer any potential carcinogenic effects from the nitrates, explaining why a diet rich in vegetables is consistently linked to a reduced cancer risk in the research. But if we go back to the refined nitrates found in ultra-processed meats for a second, there may even be a potential benefit from choosing a synthetic nitrate over a health-washed natural version. And that is that synthetic nitrates are highly regulated and capped, so there's an upper limit to how much can be used in any particular food, while naturally occurring nitrates like celery powder are not. So what that means is that your nitrate-free bacon may potentially have more nitrates than the regular bacon while it's being passed off by good marketing as nitrate-free. So my hot take on all of this is to aim to enjoy processed meats and unprocessed red meat in moderation, regardless of whether they're made with synthetic or natural nitrates. By focusing on diet variety, we can reduce the risk of overconsumption of any one additive like nitrates. And assuming you're enjoying a wide range of colorful fruits and veggies and a variety of plant-based proteins as well, I see no harm in an occasional hot dog or deli sandwich.
Hot dogs! Get your hot dogs here! Woohoo!
Okay, now let's move on to another biggie, GMOs. I'm gonna need some vodka in this. So in short, GMOs, aka genetically modified organisms, are any living organism that has had its DNA modified using genetic engineering technology to help improve growth and nutritional content while also enhancing resistance to pesticides, diseases, and droughts. In fact, an analysis of 147 studies found that GMO technology has helped to reduce chemical pesticide use by 37% and increased crop yields by 22%. This not only makes farming much easier, but it also lowers costs for both farmers and consumers. In other words, GMOs can potentially facilitate a greater crop yield, which allows farmers to feed more people for less money. They can even be life-saving for some communities. So for example, in a process called biofortification, GMO technology has been used to add more vitamin A to rice for populations with chronic vitamin A deficiency, otherwise known as golden rice. Easier farming, lower cost, greater yields, and more nutrition? Sounds like a no-brainer, right? Well, that is until the GMO controversy comes into play. So initial concerns around GMOs were sparked when a study from the 90s found that adding a protein from Brazil nuts into genetically modified soybeans could potentially trigger an allergic reaction for those allergic to Brazil nuts. And while this GMO project was quickly abandoned for this very serious reason, it led people to be suspicious of foreign genes in our food. Thankfully, since this report, there have been no documented allergic reactions to any GMO foods that currently exist on the market. GMO foods are also put through rigorous testing to prevent any allergen transfer from one food to another, and research has found that allergic reactions aren't greater for a GMO food compared to a non-GMO food. So if you have a soy allergy, for example, and you consume soy from a GMO food or from a non-GMO food, the allergic reaction potential would be the same. Now, allergies aside, the wellness community is consistently distrustful of GMOs and largely plays into what we call the natural fallacy. So this is a cognitive bias or assumption that anything found in nature is good and anything that's man-made is bad. Now, we've all seen scary Instagram or blog posts linking GMOs to things like infertility, cancer, liver toxicity, and antibiotic resistance. In most cases, this is very much not evidence-based, and when there is research cited, it's in animal models. None of these concerns have been replicated in any quality evidence on humans thus far. And there's a lot of research done on GMOs.
Lots and lots and lots and lots.
Now, in the case of the concern around the herbicide glyphosate, which is used in some GMO foods, glyphosate is classified as a possible carcinogen, which again sounds scary as But when you do the digging, you see that it's classified as Group 2A, which basically means it's based on limited evidence of carcinogenicity in humans and sufficient evidence in animals, with limited as being defined as due to chance, bias, or other confounders. They also admit that the suggesting evidence was based on agricultural exposure to glyphosate, not actual ingestion of the stuff. And as you can imagine, you get a much greater exposure when you're literally working with a chemical all day. So in response, a systematic review and meta-analysis dove deeper into the research to date and found no causal relationship between glyphosate and cancer. There's also data demonstrating that the trace amounts found in some foods, both GMOs and also non-GMO organics, which are subject to herbicide contamination, are well below residue limit standards. Now, I have to admit, this is a huge topic, and I would need like a whole YouTube series to really unpack GMOs and organics in detail if we want to discuss all of the pros and cons at play, which I am not doing in this video here. But the bottom line here is that the safety of GMOs is well substantiated by the research, which is why major food authorities like the FDA, EPA, and USDA all deem GMOs safe for consumption. Now, research has also consistently shown no nutritional difference between any given GMO and non-GMO food. And like we said, in some cases, it can actually be modified to have even more nutrition for vulnerable populations. But of course, because the term GMO conjures up images of like aliens and Frankenstein science experiments, it's alive. The food industry is eager to distance themselves from it whenever they can. So we often see the non-GMO label thrown onto products that wouldn't ever contain GMOs in the first place. So in the States, for example, there are only 10 crops approved to be genetically modified, including big cash crops like corn and soybean, but also a few other nutritious staples like potatoes, apples, and summer squash. If you're seeing the non-GMO label on strawberries or grapes, for example, it's just a marketing ploy. So my professional opinion on this super hot topic is that there are 100 other attributes I would judge a food on before concerning myself with GMOs. I might limit a lot of ultra-processed foods that are made with GMOs, not because I'm specifically scared of the GMOs, but because their overall nutrition content might not be as great as an unprocessed food. And while I pretty much always am saying the dose makes the poison, I actually don't think we even have any quality evidence that GMOs specifically are poisonous at all. At least not in contrast with their non-GMO counterparts. But that brings me to a specific and very common GMO, canola oil. Now, canola oil is kind of a triple threat to a lot of wellness influencers because A, it's a GMO, B, it contains inflammatory fats, and C, it's highly refined. Let's break these down one by one. So canola is one of the most widely used plant oils in the food industry. It's also one of the major GMO crops grown and sold in North America, the science against which we've already debunked. So that puts concern 1 of 3 to bed. The second strike against canola oil is its fatty acid composition. Wellness influencers love to call out canola as an inflammatory oil since it's made up of about 20% linoleic acid, which is a common omega-6 fat. Now, it's long been speculated that the typical Western diet, which is very high in omega-6s and very low in omega-3 fats, increases inflammation, which leads to chronic disease. This has ultimately led to the demonization of refined vegetable oils like canola, which I discuss in a little bit more detail in my video right here. But in short, while some studies have pointed to the potential inflammatory properties of a diet rich in omega-6 fats, the larger body of high-quality evidence suggests that omega-6 fats themselves don't actually have a significant effect on inflammation. In fact, a 2012 systematic review assessed the effects of omega-6 linoleic acid on inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, cytokines, and tumor necrosis factor, and found no strong link to suggest that it increased inflammation. There is even some research suggesting that omega-6 fats may even be associated with a reduced risk of cardiovascular events. Plot twist. I know. Ultimately, we may see variation in the literature as research suggests different people's genetics, age, sex, body composition, blood lipid levels, and gut microbiome can all impact their response to different fatty acids. The reality is that a lot of highly refined, nutrient-poor foods are rich in omega-6 fats because they may be deep fried in oils that happen to be high in omega-6 fats. But I would argue that a diet rich in refined and deep fried carbs isn't going to be nutritionally ideal, even if said frying were to be done in like olive or coconut oil. But that brings me to canola's third concern, how it's processed and refined. Anytime an oil is refined, all this basically means is that it's processed to 1, withstand high heat, 2, make it more stable to prolong shelf life, and 3, be more uniform in taste, smell, and appearance. But there also exists a lot of concern and controversy around the process of bleaching and deodorizing during the refining process of canola. Which I get, because when I think of the word bleach, I automatically think about the liquid bleach that we clean with, which, as we know, is highly toxic when consumed.
Don't you put it in your mouth, don't you put it in your mouth, don't you stuff it in your face.
But it's actually just a general term, and usually canola is bleached using different types of clays, often naturally occurring ones, to remove any contaminants. Ditto for deodorization, which uses hot steam to remove oxidation products. Now, one of the other scary words associated with canola is hexane. And that's basically what they use as a solvent to remove the oils from the seed. But wellness influencers love to point out that hexane is also used in things like chemical cleaners and car fuel. What they don't tell you is that hexane has a very, very low toxicity level, and there is no evidence to substantiate any risks of ingesting these trace amounts. Not to mention, it's estimated that there's only 0.8 milligrams of residual hexane per kilogram of oil, and that the ingestion of hexane from all food sources makes up less than 2% of the daily intake from all sources, most of which we get from gasoline fumes. But let's go back to processing for a sec. Now, heating and processing oils like canola ultimately strips away some of the nutritional value of the oil and can result in the formation of harmful trans fats. And given what we know about trans fats and their health risks, this is not ideal.
No.
However, the amount of trans fats in canola oil specifically is 1, highly variable, and 2, comparable to other oils. For example, one study comparing the trans fat content of multiple oils found that on average, commercial canola oil can contain anywhere from 1.9 to 3.6% trans fats, whereas walnut oil contains anywhere from 2 to 3.9%. But for some reason, we don't see walnut oil getting the same negative PR as canola oil. Regardless, like all things related to nutrition, context is important here. And the amount of trans fat that you would reasonably consume from canola oil or any other oil is unlikely to cause serious harm in the context of a balanced diet. So to put it in perspective, the WHO recommends limiting trans fat intake to less than 2.2 grams a day for the average 2,000 calorie diet. With that in mind, 1 tablespoon of canola oil provides roughly 0.2 grams of trans fat. And you can divide that by 4 if you're using that oil to cook a meal for a family of 4. And if you are still concerned about the impact of the refining process on nutritional content and fat composition, the good news is that you can absolutely purchase canola oil that is minimally processed or unrefined by looking for the label cold pressed or expeller pressed. These oils are definitely less processed, but the trade-off is that they're less stable, have a shorter shelf life, and are more expensive. So that's why we really don't see them used in large-scale food processing very much. So what is my overall take on canola oil? Well, ultimately, in my eyes, canola actually has a generally very healthy fatty acid composition. It may be 20% omega-6, but it's actually 60% monounsaturated fats and 10% omega-3 fats, meaning it has the ideal 2-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s that we know is associated with better health. I think wellness culture has used it as a scapegoat unnecessarily, simply because it's consumed in excess via ultra-processed foods, and it's the excess consumption of ultra-processed foods that's the much bigger fish to fry. So I say, if you're getting the majority of your fats from whole food sources in your day, and then cooking your vegetables or your fish in regular canola oil, or enjoying the occasional refined convenience food made with canola oil, folks, it's all gonna net out as a generally very healthy diet. But if we're eating the majority of our calories in ultra-processed convenience food that happens to be prepared with canola oil, well, I would say that is the pattern that we would probably want to try to shift. And if you're still concerned because you're using your cooking oil as your primary source of fat, then choosing a cold pressed oil may be a better nutrition bang for your buck. So on that note, I hope this information helped to lift some food fear and make you a more informed and critical consumer. And like I've said before, the focus should be on overall dietary pattern, not on specific nutrients or ingredients in any given food. So if you like this video, be sure to give it the thumbs up. Leave me a comment below on which food additives you want to see me discuss next. A big thank you again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Subscribe to this channel, and I will see you next time on Abby's Kitchen. Bye!